Now, we've got to cross to the US in just a moment, but first, Donald Trump has taken to his social media platform to slam the US women's soccer team after half a dozen players refused to sing the national anthem. The reigning champs lost their match to Sweden, knocking them out of the World Cup, of course. Donald Trump wrote, in part, many of our players were openly hostile to America. Woke equals failure. The USA is going to hell. Make America great again. No doubt about Trump, eh? When I spoke with Kristin Tate, I offered my commiserations on the loss.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. I don't watch soccer since I'm not a communist, but this was certainly
It's a communist sport.
Oh, yeah, that's what we consider it here. That's what conservatives here consider it. But hey, you know what? This was the worst loss for that women's team since they were beat by some high school soccer players here in the States a couple years ago. So, yeah, you know, patriotic Americans, they are really turned off by the politics of a lot of the women on the women's soccer team. And a lot of people who might have watched that game have just started to tune out because they're just so turned off by the politics.
Yeah, let's just concentrate on the sport, not so much the politics. And let's get into the politics now. I've got to ask you about Joe Biden because Hunter's escapades are catching up with him, especially when you consider this is what Joe Biden said just 3 years ago.
My son has not made money in terms of this thing about, what are you talking about, China.
Kristin, it just wasn't true that he made money from China. Dear, oh dear.
Yeah, I mean, the story has continuously changed. First it was, oh, well, Hunter made no money overseas. There's nothing to see here. Then it was, well, maybe he had some dealings here and there, but Joe Biden certainly wasn't aware of it. Then the story changed to, well, maybe Joe Biden was aware of some of these business deals, but don't worry, he wasn't involved at all. Then last week we find out not only was Joe Biden aware of Hunter Biden's business dealings with counterparts overseas, but he was actually on 20 phone calls with Hunter Biden's associates over the years. So this is just looking really bad. The corruption stories continue to get worse and worse. But what the news really is, Chris, in my opinion, is not just that Hunter Biden's corrupt. Those of us who have been paying attention, we've known that for years. The real news here is that for the first time, I'm noticing the media actually starting to cover this corruption with some vigor and interest. It is really fascinating to watch. Outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post are actually really reporting on Hunter Biden's corruption, his business dealings, in a way that they really weren't before. And that tells me that maybe you were onto something, Chris, when you said that Joe Biden is not going to be the nominee. I see the insiders turning on Joe Biden. They're terrified. Every time he opens his mouth to speak, they think he's too old to get through this campaign season. So I am starting to wonder if he is being pushed out so that they can get him out of there and get Gavin Newsom as their nominee. I'm wondering if that's what's going on.
Yeah, I think you could be right. You could argue that the media can't ignore the facts anymore, but more likely they're being pushed in that direction because even on the left, they realise they need to get rid of Joe Biden. It brings me to another issue that reflects decisions he took as president, and this, of course, was the disastrous evacuation of Kabul, the Afghan capital. And there was a harrowing scene this week when, at a public forum, the mother of one of the soldiers, her name is Cheryl Rex, she's the mother of Lance Corporal Dylan Merola, who was killed in that terrible evacuation. Here's what she had to say about the communication she had from President Joe Biden.
When Joe Biden, our elected president, entered the room, when he approached me, his words to me were, my wife Jill and I know how you feel. We lost our son as well and brought him home in a flag-draped coffin. My heart started beating faster, and I started shaking, knowing that their son died from cancer and they were able to be by his side. Also wondering how someone could honestly, be so heartless to say he knew how I felt a little over 24 hours and learning of my son's death. After this encounter, I have never had any personal correspondence, nor has my son been honored or his name spoken by this commander-in-chief.
Just horrible stuff, Kristin, tragedy upon tragedy, but how does the president deal with that?
Well, this is more bad news for Biden, and that debacle in Afghanistan was a real turning point for his administration. His poll numbers never recovered after that. He was sitting up at about 49–50% before Afghanistan, and after the withdrawal, he went down to about 41%, which is really bad for a president at that point. And he has never really bounced back since then. Biden, he campaigned on this return to normalcy and being kind of a moderate, but he has governed like a radical, and he has weakened our country with appeasement. I mean, he left tens of billions of dollars to the Taliban in Afghanistan. He just basically ceded the whole area to the Taliban and left 13 Americans to die and be murdered there. It is disgraceful. Americans were watching. The whole world was watching, and that makes us weak. And instead of stepping up and trying to strengthen our country with strong leadership, Joe Biden and those he surrounds himself with have been busying themselves with weakening our country from within by leaving the border open, by starting these divisions over race and gender. It is just disgraceful, Chris. So the more these heartbreaking stories come out, I suspect the worse it will be for Joe Biden as we get into this election season.
Yeah, powerful stuff there, Kristin. I can see the passion, and it's understandable when you recall that horrible evacuation and how weak it portrayed and demonstrated America was to the rest of the world. Just on that, and when we talk about Joe Biden's capacity to go on and whether he is beyond, whether the task of the presidency is now beyond him, I want to show you this clip from your home state. He's honouring the Houston Astros, and he made a quip about people or players being beyond their best, beyond their prime. Have a look.
Dusty, it wasn't easy. People counted you out saying you're past your prime. Hell, I know something about that. I know something about that.
Well, Kristin, at least he can laugh about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really pathetic at this point. More than 2/3 of voters at this point believe Biden is too old to run for president again. So we'll see what happens. I hope that he stays in this race because, if they replace him with Gavin Newsom or someone like Newsom, that would be a lot more dangerous for Republicans. He would be a much more formidable foe. But Joe Biden, his mental capacities, they are getting worse by the day. And many of his supporters who I speak to, even his most loyal supporters, they are so nervous every time he gets on a stage in front of people, or every time he walks up Air Force One, or every time he just goes in public. You just never know what's going to happen, what he's going to say. And they cannot do what they did last time. They can't do this whole campaign from his basement. They don't have COVID as an excuse anymore. There might not be mass mail-in voting to the extent there was last time because of the pandemic. He's got to actually go out there and campaign. And if he stays in this race, we're in for a lot more gaffes, and the people around him are nervous about it.
Yeah, indeed. It is excruciating to watch. Thanks so much for joining us again, Kristin.
Thank you, as always, Chris.
Honestly, if Joe Biden runs again, I might nominate for the AFL draft.